Yeah, I think kind of towards the end of what you were touching on is goes along with your parasympathetic nervous system, right? Because a lot of people, when they're in that state, and I like to say there's essentially three states, or three stages rather, not states, but three stages of what people go through. And a lot of times that is because they're operating not from the correct side of the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's dictating your fight or flight response. And a lot of people are moving through life in that fight or flight mode, not realizing that that's unhealthy, which is why they wake up and they feel anxiety every day. And this is why what Tim started off the session with, the IFS, that helps regulate and turn on your parasympathetic nervous system and not turn it off, to where you can relax and move through life in this state of essentially knowing. Because what I was referencing a little bit earlier was, to me, there's essentially, you can say, three stages maybe of manifesting, when it comes to manifesting a person in particular, right? Stage one to me, and I made a video about this, some of you may have seen it, but stage one to me is the desperation stage. And this is the stage where pretty much everybody, you're either desperate to manifest somebody new, or you're desperate to manifest somebody back. So this is the stage where I call the desperation stage. Then stage number two is essentially the realization stage, which is what a lot of you are in currently right now, where you're realizing, oh, wow, what I was doing before isn't going to work. Oh, wow, going to these coaches that just tell me to affirm isn't going to work. Oh, wow, I need to actually do a lot of deeper work than I realized. Oh, wow, this is going to take actually months, probably, if not a year or longer, most likely. This is the stage where I believe a lot of people are in right now, currently, in this awakening of content creation and looking at different people talking about this stuff on YouTube. And this is the second stage, is the realization stage. Then the third stage is basically the truth stage, right? Where now that you've been desperate in the desperation stage of trying to find love or trying to manifest love back, now that you've had the realization of that, now third stage is you're seeking truth. You're on that path of, okay, who am I? What is it that I really want? And once you hit that point, that's how you know you've done the work. But also too, the thing about that is a whole nother, I don't know if you want to use the term demon, a whole nother animal pops up once you finally get what you want, right? So to hearing you just speak, Sheena, you're not going to truly know how much work you've done until you get in that next relationship. That's when all of those dragons that you thought you slayed are going to come knocking on the door. Hey, Sheena, I'm here. Roar. That's when they're going to, so you feel good now. It's easy to feel, and this is the truth that most people don't want to talk about in this community. You feel great right now. And you mentioned having those fears and those doubts of, oh, what if I elope again? What if I find somebody again? And am I going to do that same thing? And like Tim said, that's your ego in a sense trying to protect you, keeping you safe. But you'll never really know how much work you've done until you actually get into that next relationship. And that's going to be the best teacher. And that's going to be your best measuring stick, because it's easy to be single and turn down this or turn down that guy or say, yeah, I'm living. But as soon as you get in that serious committed relationship, that's when those fears that you thought you might have dealt with, that's when they come creeping back up. And I think that's the only way you're going to really be able to tell, is once you have your feet in the game and it's live action. It's no more fake visualizations of living in the inn with a person. It's no longer you affirming to yourself. It's real live action.
I just want to say that's so true, and that's kind of like a direct confirmation, because today I had therapy, and I swear to God, she said the same thing you just said about you're never going to know how, if you're going to respond differently or what's going to happen until you're like in the ring. Then you'll see like kind of like how much you've maybe healed or like where you're at. So I
And
like that
yeah,
it's just like not going to know. I think because the ego like wants to be like, how can I avoid this at all cost again? Like I don't want to
and
feel that
yeah,
pain again or whatever.
and you know how part of how you do that is decision making,
Hmm.
right? So when you get to that crossroad, and you have to go left or you have to go right. If years past you always went left and you get to this crossroad now in your life and you still go left, you know you haven't learned the lesson. Right? So it's probably going to keep popping back up. That's why you hear those stories of people saying, why does the same thing keep happening to me? Why does the universe keep testing me? Because you keep failing the same test that's popping up in your life until you change that decision. When you make a different decision, that's how you change. If you want to use, Tim and I really don't like using spiritual language, but I mean, we can apply it here. It's applicable. But when you make a different decision, that's what causes people to jump timelines in a sense, right? It's because you made a different decision. So that different decision that you've now made is going to force you to travel a different timeline than the timeline that you were used to traveling. And so that's how you know, okay, I'm different now. It's because I made a different decision this time around compared to the decision I made 10 years ago or whatever the time frame was.
Mm-hmm. Do you have like an example?
So I'll put it to you this way. I made a video about this. I don't know, some people in here might have seen it, but an example was me in a situation with my car, right? I had a situation with my car, and I'll give you an example of car. There might be an SP situation in there that I could use too, but the car example was the first one that popped in my head. The car example is one day, this was a few months back, one day I went to the dealer and I needed to get a new tire, right? I went and got my tire looked at. He's like, yeah, you need a new tire. Your tire has holes in it and air is leaking. It's not leaking fast, but it's leaking, so you need to get a new tire. And in that moment, I had a decision to make quickly, whether I wanted to stay there and just get a new tire for a couple $100, or if I wanted to try to go find somewhere cheaper to get a new tire. In that moment, the old Marv creeped back in and said, you can go to one of these Mexicans and you can find a used tire for $70 or whatever the number is. Don't stay here and get a brand new tire for 200 or more, whatever. Because one tire for my car, probably, if I get the tires that comes with it, it's probably like 400 if I get one tire, just one tire. And so in that moment, you know, old Marv was creeping back up. Like I said, in the middle of the storm, you're in the game. Yeah. Old Marv's creeping back up. But then I made a decision right there. And I said, Marv, what are you worried about? You have the money to get the tire. Why do all this work trying to go to somewhere else and trying to look to save money on a tire when you're here right now and they can take care of it for you? Just do it right now, because future Marv, you know, multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire Marv would just take care of it now. So that's how you need to act and be right now. So in that decision, when I made a decision to stay and get my tire changed, I changed timelines, right? And so I stayed and got my tire changed. And then what happened is maybe a day or so later, the money came back to me out of nowhere that I had spent on that tire. So that was a perfect example of me shifting timelines and thinking and acting as the new person instead of thinking and acting as the old person. Because if I had thought and acted like the old Marv, I would have stayed on that timeline of, oh man, I would have had a poverty mindset. And then I would have still been looking for poverty solutions. And then it continues to perpetuate. And so I think to me, I think that's a great example of shifting.
Yeah, that is a really good example. I like that. Very relatable. Yep. Instead of being like, oh, I'm going to penny pinch and then you got to do this. And it's actually harder. It's actually making it harder for yourself when you think in the poverty mindset way. But yeah.
And you're wasting time. You're wasting time traveling, calling around, looking for somebody. You're just wasting. So, and time is the most important thing we all have.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
All I would add to that is just that, because I know Marvin agrees with this, the way we just went over that in the great example that Marvin just gave, it makes it sound really dramatic. Often this stuff is, one reason it can be difficult, frankly, is it's very subtle. It's not always like, oh, I'm noticing I could go tire shopping or I cannot. Or like I'm noticing I could go out with this guy who, like, you know, something is off or I could not. It's sometimes a lot of the time, a lot more subtle and nuanced. So you get these clear tests when you're then in it, right? But there's all these little tests along the way. And like Sheena, like one reason I feel really confident that like things are going to be much better for you than they were in the past in this regard is because you've already received so many confirmations that things have shifted, right? You've already shifted so many timelines, if you want to use that language. You know, you've shifted your, even quote unquote, improved your state already. But it doesn't mean, just like Marvin said, that like when you actually like start going out with a guy you like, that this shit's gonna all of a sudden gonna come up. That still certainly could happen. And sometimes it doesn't. Again, we're giving, this is a big call. This is general advice. This isn't like one-on-one where we're really getting nitty gritty here. It doesn't always happen like this, but generally speaking, like those 3 stages that Marvin talked about and stuff coming up when you've like figured out a lot of like this SP and manifesting stuff like that, that's really interesting. And it's like, you know, that's why we always say it's like, well, it's one thing to manifest the SP, but then the problem is you got the other person. Oh man, what do you do now? You know, it's like that's when the real work starts. That's where the real teacher is, you know, forget about Neville or Abraham Hicks or whatever. It's like, it's your partner, you know, which, yeah, brings us to, you know, like why we also always talk about the golden rule and treating others the way you want to treat yourself, you know, want to be treated yourself, and why that's so important. So yeah, thank you, Sheena, for sharing all that. Really, really helpful. I'm going to read, so we had a couple comments in the chat. I have a comment. I don't have an SP, but it's difficult to meet similar people because I'm an introvert with social anxiety. Listening to affirmations makes my anxiety worse. So what I would say to that is, first of all, take a look at some of Marvin and my videos. Don't use it first. This is just my opinion. Obviously, this isn't like, you know, gospel or whatever. Don't listen to affirmations. Don't use affirmations to make you anxious. Any technique that makes you anxious, don't use. Excuse my French, but fuck that. Like, everyone says use this, do this. Don't do any of that. Just do what makes you not feel anxious and makes you feel good. What we have to figure out in this situation is you're introverted. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you become anxious when you're in social situations. So, you know, you can either look at that directly, or you can look at ways to kind of move around that. Like, so how can you meet someone without being in social situations? You know, can it maybe start online and you build a friendship that way, and then you talk and then meet them, you know, as opposed to like going out to a bar or, you know, being in a party with a bunch of friends, and it might be much more socially anxiety inducing. But that's the work. Is like, there's nothing wrong with being an introvert, and social anxiety is something that a ton of people have. And guess what? A ton of people with social anxiety meet great partners, but you have to work through it. And in my opinion, usually work with it to facilitate that happening. But definitely don't do affirmations or any manifesting technique unless it feels good to you, unless it feels aligned with you. There's no need. You just really need, honestly, like 1 or 2 techniques or things you like to do. You don't need to be listening to all these people on YouTube, including Marvin and I, when we talk about all these cool techniques, because they may be cool, but they may not be appropriate. What's appropriate is you, and like what works for you. And that can change. Like the techniques can change, but those underlying principles do not. Any additional thoughts about that, Marvin?
Yeah, I would say that I would, to anybody in here that would think how they are personality wise, I would say definitely get rid of those excuses. I would say get rid of all excuses, because if you really want something, you'll find a way to get it done. And if you don't really want something, then you'll find an excuse. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but I truly stand by that.